Welcome to the Empowerment Show with Melissa Heisler. Every week, discover new personal choices with practical, inspiring guides. And now, here's Melissa.
Welcome to the Empowerment Show. I'm Melissa Heisler, empowerment coach at It's My Life, and it is your life. Live it. Today, I will be talking to Tom North about child abuse, domestic violence, and turning despair into hope, self-discovery, and a fulfilling life. Tom North is the award-winning author of the book True North, The Shocking Truth About Yours, Mine, and Ours. He appears on radio and television programs and is a keynote speaker at colleges, universities, and conferences. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Melissa.
So back in 1968, there was a film that came out about your family called Yours, Mine, and Ours, and it was about the Beardsley family, which was a blending of two large families. I believe your mother had 8 children and your stepfather had 10, and it was the coming together of those families, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What happened? I believe Lucille Ball was kind of behind bringing the film to life. What happened the first? I'm sorry? I was going to say, what happened the first time that you met Lucille Ball and she met your family?
So when Lucille Ball came to Carmel to meet the family and meet my mother and stepfather and learn something about the role that she would play in the film Yours, she met my mother and my stepfather, and then she very quickly took my mother aside and she said, "You keep that man away from me." Because she had picked up on his energy, and she didn't like what she was seeing and feeling.
So what type of person was your father? What was it that she was sensing?
So my mother shared with me later in life that the reason that she married this man, Mr. Beardsley, was because when she met his 10 children, she saw 10 children living in terror for their lives. Those are her words, not mine. So she felt that she could help them by marrying them and saving them. That's why she married Frank.
Oh, that's a really interesting story. Was your mother did she just have a big heart, or did she have some kind of counseling, or was it just that she knew what it took to raise the children and knew that there was something not right?
You know, I think there was a couple of elements to that. One was that my mother was very much a woman of her generation. And chapter 2 is all about Helen. So she was a child of World War II. She was a young girl at that time. And that era was a time of self-sacrifice and everyone pitching together for the greater good. And so that was very formative personality. The second thing is that she was very much an Irish Catholic product of the Roman Catholic Church, and which also promoted self-sacrifice. And in her generation, there was a big emphasis on martyrdom. So she responded to those two influences in her life, and I think that is what motivated her to take on this very, very task.
So what was it actually like growing up, and how old were you when the two families merged, and what was it like to live in that household?
So I was 7 years old when my mother married Frank Beardsley, and it was confusing to me. It was frightening at times when I was around Frank Beardsley because he never knew when he was going to become violent. He was always abusive and very often violent. So it was very difficult to live in that household. And I became something like a deer at the pond, where I would, the image would be to reach down and take a sip of water and then look around to see if there's a predator lurking nearby. That predator was
So, is that what your siblings also experienced in the household?
Yes, we all experienced that, and we kind of watched each other's back. And when he would come home from work, the word would spread through the house that he's home. Run. So we would. There would be children running out of doors and going to other parts of the house to make sure they weren't available to use.
What was the turning point for you? How long were you in that household? And when did you realize that this wasn't the normal way to be raised?
It's a good question. I was in the household for 11 years. When I was 17 years old, I graduated from high school and I left immediately. And like many youngsters, many teenagers, I escaped first into drugs. And so while I was a teenager, I got into smoking marijuana and harder drugs. And that was a problem for me. I was basically a drug addict for 5 years. And when I was 22, a friend of mine introduced me to an Eastern meditation practice called transcendental meditation. I began to practice TM. I never did drugs again.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, unfortunately, that seems to be a route for individuals who go through abuse, is that they turn to something that will just take all feeling away. And so alcohol, drugs, or other addictions often come into play. And it's a true blessing that your friend introduced you to meditation, because it is a way for us to retrain our brain and to be able to deal with some very difficult situations in our life in a different way, to be able to safely deal with those things.
That was certainly my experience.
Now, it sounds like, and I don't know if this was around your 20s or if it was later in life, that there was more of a group healing with your family, that you all participated in some group therapy to work through some of your childhood issues?
Yes, and that took place in 1989. My younger brother approached me and asked me if I would help him structure a family therapy session. And my response was, do you realize the scale of what you're trying to accomplish here? And he said, are you going to help me or not? My response was, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Imagine getting that many people in the same room to talk about things that they had been trying to avoid their entire adult lives.
So were both parents involved in these groups, or was it just the children for healing?
So in the first session, there were only 8 of us who showed up. It was so productive that we became fervent proselytizers for a second therapy session, at which 14 showed up. And so as that session was also very productive, we decided to have a third session and get the parents there, and they did.
Wow. What was that like, to actually have a session with your stepfather and to be able to bring up your experiences?
So that was remarkably dramatic. And I write about that in chapter 27, which is called The Demise of Grendel, because he really was very much a monster in many ways. And so we actually got him to a point where he apologized for his horrible behavior throughout the years.
That's definitely, I'm sure, was a wonderful healing for everyone involved to receive that apology. It can't make things go away, but it certainly, I know you were saying that just going through the therapy, it was able for you guys to detach from the movie version of your life, which was kind of, it was certainly not realistic and probably very idealistic, versus really what you went through. And then to have an apology, it was acknowledged and it was released at that point.
And you know, the contrast between film and our actual experience in the Beardsley household was so dramatic. It was really kind of crazy making. So to get closure with that, or at least have the opportunity for closure with that crazy making contrast, was a blessing. And we all had the opportunity for forgiveness, which is the beginning of moving forward in life. To forgive Frank Beardsley and forgive ourselves. And it was really a dramatic event. That's why I spent a whole chapter.
And forgiveness is a very powerful tool for our own healing. And I think a lot of times that people think forgiveness means saying that it was okay, or, you know, not standing up for the wrongs in our lives. But forgiveness is really a release of ourselves and being able to release that anger and pain that we have. And we don't say it was okay what they did, but we release holding on to it anymore and letting that fester.
I couldn't have expressed it any better. And without that release of the pain, if we don't discharge the emotional energy around the memory, there is no pain.
And I think I don't know how long afterwards from your own healing that you now do a lot of work for those who are going through child abuse. Is there? Can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you do with the National Foundation that you're working with?
Okay, so there's a national organization called CASA, which is the Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children. And I have given a keynote address for one of their fundraisers here locally. And I'm scheduled to give 2 more later this year. And I'm a national sponsor of CASA, and I'm involved in helping through fundraising and raising awareness of this issue around child abuse and domestic violence. I'm also active in a group called Breakthrough for Men, which unfortunately is only available locally on our peninsula. Very wonderful, wonderful organization which helps men overcome many of the issues that create domestic violence and child abuse.
I think that's fantastic. I know CASA does a lot of work of actually being an advocate for the children, but the work of the group that you talked about, I think it's so important to break the cycle. And I know a lot of times that people who have gone through abuse, they almost mirror that. That's the only way they know how to be. And so it continues the cycle that they'll abuse their children, who will abuse their children. And to be able to actually have treatment and support for those individuals who are exhibiting those actions is really powerful. It's important to help the children going through it, but also to break the cycle.
Absolutely. And as Michael Perreno, the president of National CASA, shared with me, he said, what we do is we help to remove the obstacles so that children can become who they are meant to be.
And that's fantastic. I think a lot of the people that I work with are, many of them have gone through difficult childhoods. And I know a lot of times, and I don't know if you can speak to this as well, that they lose their childhood. They become adults older because they're so much more aware of the world and some of the negativity in it. Or, you know, their parents are alcoholics and they learn to caretake the parent instead of having the caretake them. But in that process, they've missed out on their childhood. They've missed out on learning who they are and what they can become and what's in store for them in a positive way in their life. And is that some of what you see as well, that the individuals who've gone through abuse are kind of missing themselves?
Well, I've met several of what we refer to as CASA kids, and my experience, my observation of them is that they are on their way to becoming who they are meant to be. And my experience is that they're very grateful people and happy. Of course, I met them under positive social circumstances. I haven't seen them under stress, so I can't comment on that. But generally, my observation is that CASA does wonders.
And I'll make sure for our listeners that I'll have a link on the website so that you can find out more about CASA if you'd like to support them or if you're in need of their services. So we will have that up for you. Tom, I was wondering, is there any kind of message of hope that you can give to anybody who may be a survivor of child abuse?
Thank you for asking that question, Melissa. It's probably the most important thing to talk about. The first third of my book is really about the descent into darkness and having a experience. The latter two-thirds of the book is really about what I did about it. And really, that's the most important consideration is, okay, you don't always get roses in life, but the question is, what are we going to do? And we can take the broken pieces of our lives and we can turn our lives around and create a more favorable outcome, happy, well-adjusted, if we choose. I have to emphasize, that's a choice.
It is. I know it probably doesn't feel that way. I think what happens a lot is people who grow up in a very negative environment, they can see that there's no opportunity and they can feel that there's no choice. Like you said, your father came home and you guys all ran and hid or, stayed away and you didn't feel like there was another choice for you except to escape. And I think just the awareness that we do have a choice on how we live and how we approach things can be empowering in itself.
And so relative to that, it's so important to have at least some positive influence in a child's life because it's so easy for a child to blame themselves for their life circumstances. Say, well, I don't have a positive family environment, so I must be a bad person or I must have done something wrong somewhere along the line. And it's just not true. There is a certain amount of randomness in the universe. And one of those expressions of that can be our family environment. So it's very important that we utilize and support organizations like CASA, like Breakthrough, and other organizations like that, quite a few in the to help children realize that they're okay in and of themselves and that this is not their fault. I blamed myself for a long time for my environment, for a lot of things in my life. And it was simply a function of bad programming for a child. And I've spent my whole adult life reprogramming my brain.
And luckily we can reprogram our brain. And I love what you said too, is that, and I think this is normal for people in that situation, is that we look to ourselves. What did I do wrong? I must not be worth anything if this is the family I'm brought into, or, all the negative self-talk. And especially if there's no positive role model saying, no, this is what's good about you, it can be really difficult to be able to have a sense of self-worth and self-love. And it's terrific that people like yourself have made it through this and can help guide others who have gone through this experience, because we all have self-worth no matter where we're born or what we go through.
So true. I was in conversation with a young man who had read True North, The Shocking Truth About Yours, Mine, and Ours. And this was, he was one of my early readers. And before I published the book, and I was actually thinking about not publishing it, he said, no, He said, you have to publish. He said, you don't understand. I was suicidal and I was going to kill myself until I read your book. He said, and it gave me hope. It gave me direction in my life. He said, and you've got to give that opportunity.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. And I think, if nothing else, and sometimes our horrible experiences are there so that we can help someone else. And so it doesn't justify it happening, but it's a blessing, the work that we do ourselves to overcome, to hopefully inspire others. So I think it is absolutely terrific that you came out with your book, Tom, and can help others understand they're not alone. Because I think that's important too, is that it's not just me, this happens elsewhere and I can overcome it as well.
No, that's such a great point. We as human beings have so much more in common than that which differentiates. And in some cases, in fact, unfortunately, in lots of cases, that which we have in common is a difficult childhood. The tendency is for us to isolate when we have had difficulty in our early history and to blame ourselves, shame ourselves, and to not know what to do about it. But if we realize that we're not alone, there are lots of people who have had difficulty in their life and who have made themselves into happy, productive, well-adjusted people. So we need to seek those people out. We need to reflect on that issue of forgiveness, forgive ourselves for our misguided misinterpretation.
Absolutely, and it's great that there's guideposts that people can go to and so many resources now available. And I think it's also very important to bring up that if you're currently in an abusive family, that you can get help now. Go to a teacher. I know Ginger Cadlick was on the show recently, and there's some wonderful information I'll share on this posting as well of resources that you can go to get immediate help. And of course, CASA and some other sources as well, that you don't have to go through this alone. And there are ways to change your experience and to have a better life.
You raised such a good point. It's really almost impossible to go through recovery. That's really what we're talking about. We're talking about recovery instead of life circumstances. So it's so critically important to get help because the self-talk that you referred to can be so negative and so self-reinforcing. And so it's important to get an objective
to get that reflection, that objective looking. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think recovery, that's a great term to put on this, because it is really recovering from the life that wasn't serving you and all the harms that were brought on you. And there is a process to be able to shed all of those years. And I do honor you, Tom, for your openness to be able to share your experience and your hurts and your recovery from it as well, to hopefully be an inspiration for others to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being on the show. We managed to make it through a whole 30 minutes here together. I do want to tell our listeners that your book is available on Amazon, and I think all the major bookstores have it available. And so check out True North by Tom North.
And also, if I may, if you buy the book on our website, 10% of the proceeds of sale goes to CASA. So you can find us at truenorthbytomnorth.com and go and buy the book.
I will definitely put that on the posting as well. That is terrific that the proceeds go back. That is fabulous. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Tom, and sharing your experience and sharing your book. We're honored to have you on.
It's been a joy, Melissa. Thank you for having me on your show.
Join Melissa Heisler next week right here at The Empowerment Show. Join the conversation at facebook.com/The Empowerment Show or twitter.com/Empowerment Show.